Hi, my name is SparkleSpritz and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I am going to tell 8 scary stories. Some stories have a second part. I am hopeful that I'll be able to narrate the second part as well. Go check the writers out, their links will be in the description box below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for upcoming videos. You can follow me on my social media at SparkleSpritz on Twitter and at SparkleSpritzYT on Instagram. And without further ado, I hope you all have a scary night. Why is it that we can never remember when we fell asleep? Think about it. What time did you fall asleep last night? I'm not asking you for what time it was when you went to bed. No, I'm asking you to think of the moment you actually fell asleep. You likely recall lying in your bed with your eyes closed. Maybe you'd had a long day of work and fell asleep within seconds of falling into your bed. Maybe you spent hours tossing and turning under your covers. Whatever your case may be, there was a certain point last night where your brain stopped remembering. You don't actually remember falling asleep. You just did. To most of you, this likely makes sense. Of course, your brain shuts down for the night. It shouldn't need to store that as a memory. I used to be like you too. I've dealt with sleep paralysis my entire life. For those of you who don't know or just aren't sure, sleep paralysis is the inability to move one may experience upon first waking up in the morning or just before falling asleep. It is often accompanied by visions or feelings of unease, of panic. I still remember my first experience. I was probably only 10 years old when it happened. I'm sure I had just woken up from having a nightmare, but I couldn't tell you what it had been about. My eyes opened, but somewhere deep down I still felt like I had been dreaming. I was lying on my side in bed, facing my bedroom window. In the darkness of my room, I swore I could see a shadowy figure move away from the edge of my bed. I remember trying to turn over and see who had been in my room, but I was shocked to discover that I couldn't move. I tried to wiggle as hard as I could to escape my invisible restraint, but I remained staring at my window. I couldn't shake the horrifying feeling that someone was standing in my doorway, watching me. I tried to scream for my parents, but no words came out. I still remember the panic that built up inside of me that morning, mainly because I felt it 100 of times ever since. As I struggled, I could almost sense that my mobility was returning. I pushed hard, sitting up quickly in my bed. I looked towards my doorway, finding it empty. The door was opened. I slept with the door closed every night. This obviously shook me, as I was just a child. Even after my father had explained that he checked in on me the night before and had simply left the door open, I was still terrified about the entire experience. Rightfully so, I should add. I've experienced similar happenings ever since. As I mentioned earlier, hallucinations are common with sleep paralysis. Shadowy figures are one of the most common visual hallucinations. Occasionally, I wake up to find several figures in my room, but they disappear once I regain my mobility. Just a few months ago, I experienced the worst hallucination I'd ever had up until that point, at least. I'd woken up with my eyes towards the window. It felt as if a person were leaning on my side, their hand on my shoulder. I heard a disturbing whispering enter my ear, the voice speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The voice began to raise in volume, though it never left from a whisper. As I felt myself become closer to escaping, the whisper became a scream, as if a woman had been stabbed just beside me. I sat up in my bed, panting, my back covered in sweat. The fan on my ceiling was the only sound I could hear, other than my own breathing, of course. That morning was the first time I'd experienced an auditory hallucination. It shook me, and I'm nearly 20 years old now. Last night, I found myself heading to bed far later than I usually do. It was nearly 1 in the morning when my head finally hit the pillow. I laid my head down with a sigh, rolling over to set my alarm clock. I didn't have any plans for the day, so I set it for a reasonable 10 o'clock. I rolled over onto my right side, groaning softly. I felt exhausted, but at the same time I didn't really feel like going to sleep yet. I tossed and turned for a little while. begging myself to just fall asleep already. I glanced at the alarm clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning now. I sighed, rolling over onto my back. Most people tend to stick to one position when they sleep, but not me. I can sleep nearly anywhere if you ask me to do it. It's ironic, really. I can sleep anywhere, yet I still need an hour to do so. I stared up at my ceiling, breathing softly. Closing my eyes, I tried my best to let sleep take over. I nearly dozed off a few times, but something continued to pull me out of it. At a point where I was half asleep, an itch in my leg caught my attention. I inhaled, reaching down to scratch it. I was shocked to find that my arm would not move. I had never experienced sleep paralysis while falling asleep. I was aware that it was a thing that happened, that it was common. But it was a new experience for me. Would it be any different? I could feel the panic beginning to grow inside of me as my soul began to wiggle around in its immovable shell. Even after 10 years of experience, the horror one feels during sleep paralysis never seems to go away. When you're thrown in that situation, especially coming straight from just being asleep, few people could be prepared, really. I caught a shadowy figure move in the corner. I ignored it, trying harder to move. Had my arm twitched? It took me only a few moments to notice that my bed was surrounded by 3 dark figures. I stopped struggling for a moment, watching them as they stared at me. I had only ever seen 2 at once. I continued to struggle. Something about this felt different. I'm not sure how to put it into words. I had a disturbing feeling, one that told me that I shouldn't have been awake right now. A soft whisper began to sound from my right. I couldn't make out the words. My recent bouts of sleep paralysis had not included auditory hallucinations. My brain was really working hard on this one. The whispering became louder. I swore I could feel my legs shift slightly. One of the figures began to move slowly towards my bed. It looked as if it were floating. I stared at the figure, my panic growing exponentially. I could somewhat make out its face in the darkness. The skin surrounding its skull seemed thin. It was as if no muscle rested against the bone. I didn't want to do this any longer, more so than I had ever before at least. I fought hard against paralysis. I would have been shaking with fear had I been able to move at all. The figure lifted one of its arms, moving it slowly towards me. This was a freaking nightmare. In the moment I started to think it was just a nightmare. Had I fallen asleep? I didn't remember falling asleep. The figure laid his hand against my bare leg. A cold chill ran up my thigh as it touched me. Its skin was icy cold. If I was actually dreaming, I was shocked. It felt so freaking real. Inside I was screaming. This couldn't be happening. Had I read about the brain creating a phantom sensation during paralysis? I couldn't remember. The whispering beside me was getting louder. I could feel my consciousness returning quickly. It was as if my soul was running through a dark tunnel towards the bright light of mobility. I sat up abruptly, letting out a cry. The cold sensation on my leg remained. The 2 figures standing at the foot of my bed moved suddenly, as if they had not been expecting me to wake up. As the 2 figures disappeared into nothingness, the figure touching me pulled back. Its mouth opened wide, and a horrifying shriek escaping from its throat. The figure disappeared within half of a second, immediately cutting off the wail. I remained in bed, beginning to cry. I didn't go back to sleep last night. I'm not sure what those things are. All these years, I thought they were just figures of my brain's disturbing imagination. Maybe they are just my imagination. But none of my explanations are allowing me to move on from what happened last night. I ask you again, why are you unable to remember what happens when you fall asleep? It's because they come out of hiding when you do. It's because they like to watch. It's because they don't want you to remember. We need help. We're scared and we're desperate. This is our last resort. We've checked the internet and libraries. We've even asked hunters, supernatural enthusiasts, and even our local crazy people. Nobody knows anything about this thing. So I hope to God someone in this world knows how to kill it. My name is Elizabeth Kane, and a little bit over a week ago, something attacked my teammate Molly, Parker, and I. We're neighbors and live in a small New Hampshire town. We've been playing soccer for as long as we could walk and have been friends since before then. Nothing like it has happened. Not in the 9 years I've known Molly, and not in my 15 years of life either. I can't remember much about the actual attack. I know we were walking home from practice, the same way we've done every single day. And I remember this horrible snarling and the scent of something burning. After that, all I can 100% positively recall is the absolute terror that overtook me as we ran home. And that it, whatever it is, was loud. I don't trust the rest of what I remember. It changes a lot. For the last week and a half, we've been taking the public bus from practice to the edge of our street. This thing follows us, but can't pass through doors or our houses. That doesn't stop it from scratching and snarling at them though. I haven't slept properly in days because of it. I'm so freaking tired. This bit is for anyone here who thinks they know what it is and wants to help us. The thing that attacked us, it resembles a wolf, at least its face does. It was massive, twice my height at least, and had a build of a bear. Its fur, skin, hair was dark and didn't have any shine to it. I already mentioned the scent that came with it, like something nasty was burning. I haven't burned many things in my life, but if I had to guess, it would have been the scent of garbage. Or a body. God, I hope that's not what a body smells like. This might be a given, but it was fast. Really fast. Both Molly and I have been playing soccer since we could walk, and we barely made it inside her house before it caught us. I'd provide a photo, but the thing doesn't show up in pictures either. We've only ever seen it between 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. Are those times significant for anything? Do they mean something? There are no glaring symptoms after seeing it. I felt nauseous and disorientated. I still do, even now. But I don't think that counts. If it does, how do I make it stop? Molly says it's some type of demon. I don't think so. I say it's some freak of nature that seems more realistic. But at this point, I'll accept demon if that's what it takes to get rid of it. How do we kill it? Please. Please, for the love of God, make your instructions as detailed as possible. This is the one time in my life where I can't mess up. I took the job because it was close to home. I was afraid my car would die. At least this way, I could always get to work. The store was tiny, but somehow had room for all the accepted vices. Cigarettes, beer, lotto, even a rag of sad X-rated magazines that hid almost behind the counter. It wasn't too long before I got to know the regular customers. Some were just working stiffs, habitatedly stopping in for coffee and cigarettes. Others were alcoholics, returning multiple times each night to buy more beer. Then there were the lurkers. They wanted to hang around and drink coffee and talk. Most of them were nice enough, despite being the kind of person who hung around a convenience store at 3 a.m. There were a few of them though, who I eventually started to dread. The blowhard with his politics and racism, the mental health casualty who probably should have been in a facility, and Ed. Ed worked at the dump. He started work at 5 a.m. He'd show up at my store sometime around 4ish usually. He'd buy coffee and a beer claw and linger. One day Ed brought me a couple of Venetian steaks from a deer he'd shot. It was a little strange, but I thanked him and put the steaks in the freezer. Then he brought me chocolate roses, which is when I figured out why Ed was hanging around so much. After that, I dread the sight of Ed's truck pulling into the parking lot. I wasn't a confrontational person. I needed my job. What was I going to do if he pushed the issue? He kept bringing me unwanted gifts, and I kept trying desperately to be polite, but not encouraging. Then, one day he just didn't show up. I didn't notice at first. It was probably a week before I realized that Ed hadn't been in. I was relieved. The more time went past, the more relieved I got. I didn't question my good luck. If I thought about it at all, I thought maybe Ed had found someone else to pursue. Hopefully someone who wanted a middle-aged redneck who worked at the dump. It was probably a good 6 months later that I thought I saw Ed's truck pulling into the parking lot. My stomach dropped, but he didn't come in. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. I'd see the truck out of the corner of my eye, but he never actually come into the store, always when there was no one else around. One of the other late-night regulars was a cop. He'd come in for coffee and occasionally a pastry, if they were fresh out of the oven. Ed's phantom truck was really skeeving me out. I felt kind of stupid. He'd never done anything besides give me inappropriate gifts. But the next time the cop came in, I asked him about Ed. He knew who Ed was. Was being the operative word. Ed had been dead for months. He'd been caught stealing cash from the dump. They charged a fee to drop trash, and Ed had been pocketing the cash. Then he'd hung himself. I only stayed at that job for another couple of weeks. Being all alone at night was too creepy. My new job is 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Even in the winter time, it's daylight when I get there, and still light when I leave. But yesterday, I thought I saw a familiar truck pulling into the parking lot. Everyone had a childhood fear. Lots of kids are scared of clowns, monsters under their bed, boogeymen in the closet, normal stuff, you know. I guess because I was a child, no one believed me about the several heads that I saw when it was dark, and no one believed me about the lady on the ceiling. It started innocently enough. The bedtime door cracked, the usual thing. I was about 10 years old when I first noticed the heads. It started with one. My closest door was partially open, the light from the hallway drifting through the bedroom and focusing on a small sliver of the open closet door. One of the heads, it was slightly shrunken, sitting high up on the shelf. Even though it was small, about the size of a toddler's head, the eyes were full-sized and bulging, staring directly at me. I remember screaming for my mother and asking her to check, but when the lights were on, it disappeared. They only came in the dark. A few nights later, I saw two of them. Skulls with skin shrunken against them, bulging eyes staring directly at me from the closet shelf. They never moved, never spoke, but stared at me with their huge unnatural eyeballs, until the light came on and they disappeared. My siblings were always asleep at this point, and I didn't want to wake up the younger kids, so I guess that they didn't see them either. It didn't matter if the closet door was closed or not. Shortly after the lights turned off, the door would slowly creak open to reveal those awful heads on the shelf. After a few nights, the third head appeared. My closet was less than halfway open, but 3 heads were clearly visible, smiling at me with their bulging eyes and shrunken skin. I couldn't help but scream out for my mother when I saw one of the heads blink. Of course, when my mother checked the closet, there was no sign of the heads. I went to bed terrified every single night, terrified of those awful heads, terrified of their stares. It was awful. She showed up after the third dismembered head appeared, the woman on the ceiling. I had been laying in bed with my head facing directly up and my eyes squeezed shut, knowing that the closet door was open and presenting those awful heads. I had been plagued by them for weeks and definitely didn't want to see them again. I heard a scuttling sound, and my eyes flew open. My first thought, believing that the heads had somehow grown legs and were coming for me. But no, this was much worse. Instead, there was a woman on my ceiling, on all fours, looking down at me. She was upside down, so her long dark hair hung lower than both her head and the flowing gray dress that she was wearing. Our eyes met, and I tried to summon everything within me to scream. But my throat had closed, and I couldn't muster a sound. Her eyes were so wide and so dark, it was as though she was swallowing me up. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few seconds before she click-clacked away on the ceiling and retreated into my closet. As soon as she was gone, my throat opened up, and I released all the pent-up fear inside of me, screaming as loud as I could. It took a long time for my mother to come to my room, but when she did, she wrapped me in her arms and tried to soothe me. "Oh darling, it's okay. Everything is going to be okay. Don't worry," she sniffed. "Mommy's got you, and nothing will happen to you. I promise. I swear. I'm here for you. Don't you worry about a thing. Mommy's doing okay, and you're Mommy's big girl. I've got a new job maybe soon, and oh, did I tell you about the pool opening soon? Wouldn't you like to learn how to swim? I used to love swimming as a kid." It took nearly an hour or so, but my mom's voice eventually lulled me to sleep. I saw the heads in the closet every night for 4 straight nights, but I was grateful to see them over the woman on the ceiling. Unfortunately, she appeared on the 5th night. I heard the click-clack scuttling sound first, and when I slowly moved my gaze up from the closet, along the ceiling, past the ceiling fan, there she was, practically directly over my head. Her hair hung so low from her upside-down position that it nearly brushed against my stuffed monkey, Sir Benjamin, that I kept beside my pillow. Our eyes met, and her huge eyes seemed to get even bigger as her mouth spread into a wide smile. Her skin was so dark white, gray even, almost as gray as her dress, but practically transparent. Her upside-down eyes seemed to penetrate deep inside of me, and I was nearly paralyzed with fear, almost, when the woman on the ceiling extended her arm towards me, shorter than the length of her hair, but still way too close. I somehow broke free of the paralyzing terror and ran from my bed. I tore into the living room and came face to face with a group of adult strangers that I didn't know, laughing and partying in our living room. I looked around wildly, but didn't see my parents anywhere. I tried to move unnoticed through the crowd across the apartment where my parents' bedroom was. I was nearly there when someone touched my shoulder and I rolled around asking, "Mommy?" "No, kid. She's in the bathroom there," a lady responded. I thought that she looked familiar, maybe a neighbor or something, but I didn't care at the time. I headed to the kid's bathroom that she had pointed at and turned the knob, not even bothering to knock. Instead of my mom though, I found a man bending over the sink, sniffing something into his nose. "Where's my mom?" I asked. Not here, kid," he responded, then pushed me out of the bathroom and slammed the door behind me. I tried to go back through the people in the living room, but a few of them gauged up on me and physically brought me back to bed. The lady on the ceiling was gone. The shrunken heads in the closet mocked me until I fell asleep. The next morning I refused to talk to my mom, and I guess that she felt the same way. She just laid on the couch and told me to make sure that my siblings ate breakfast. After a few hours though, when I was about to put the youngest two down for a nap, she grabbed me by the hand and said we can talk once Daddy was home. We didn't though, not really. Her and Daddy locked themselves in their room for a long time. I fed the kids dinner, and then Mommy and Daddy put them to sleep. Mommy talked to me, which was more like she talked at me, about not getting up after bedtime, and then I put myself to bed. I knew there would be no point in me trying to talk to her about the woman on the ceiling, or about the mean adults in the living room. The lady on the ceiling came again that night, but this time she spoke to me. Her long hair swept across her Benjamins, and as she crawled closer to me, her eyes fixed directly on mine, until she opened her mouth and said softly, "Come with me, Krista." Her long, thin gray arm extended down towards me as she spoke my name. I was terrified, but I wasn't frozen with fear this time. Her giant eyes scared the hell out of me, but I stared into them and bravely stated, "No." She gazed at me in her upside-down position and gave me a smile that would almost seem sympathetic, if it wasn't for all of the teeth and the gray wormy lips. "Your mommy isn't doing very well as a mommy, and..." She gestured to the closet. "I take care of all of my children. Come with me, child. We'll take care of you." "No!" I screamed, tearing the blankets away from me and rushing towards the door. I heard her limbs clicking away on the ceiling as she retreated into the closet, and she was gone by the time I threw the door open. My siblings didn't even notice the light from the hallway shining on their faces. I stood in the doorway for a few moments, looking back at the 4 of them in their beds, and then I raced forward into the brightly lit hallway. "Mommy!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I slept on the couch that night, with my mother's arms wrapped around me. She tried to lull me to sleep with random tales of love, princesses and sharks, astronauts and forests, global warming and jellyfish-filled tidal waves, but I was awake for good. I had tried to ask her about the heads in my closet and the woman on the ceiling, but she only responded that the woman on the ceiling is better than a man in your bed. She also said that maybe I should go with the woman if she wants me, since there are already too many kids here. She faked laughed and said she was kidding, but then she grabbed me by the shoulders and looked at me right in the eyes. I love you so much, but if you find someone else who wants you, you should go. It seemed like just for a minute her eyes looked normal. For just a brief second, her hands were still as she stared at me. But that brief moment was broken when she rose from the couch and went to her room with Daddy. After staying in there for a few minutes, she came back out and was her usual self again. A few nights passed by peacefully, with only heads to worry about, but it lasted less than a week. I was laying in bed, drifting off to sleep with Sir Benjamin safely by my side, when I heard a soft click-clack sound on the ceiling. My eyes popped open, and there she was, hanging upside down from the left corner of the ceiling, above my head. Krista. The woman on the ceiling sat softly, meeting my eyes and smiling gently. It took a few moments for me to find my voice. "Why are you here?" I asked, feeling both terrified and a little bit curious. "My sweet Krista, I'm here for you because you need me. I'm here to help you." "Help me how?" "I want to take you away from this awful place. I'll be your mommy, and you won't have to worry about any of this ever again." "No, I can't," I replied harshly. I couldn't leave my brothers and sisters, and of course not my parents either. The upside-down woman's eyes softened a bit and seemed almost sad. It was as if she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Your life will only be filled with pain and turmoil if you don't come with me, child. My children in the closet won't even be close to the scariest thing that you will endure in this life. Please join me." Again that thin gray arm reached down to me, and I began to stretch my own hand up in return. After all, even my mom said to go if I was wanted, and my mom obviously didn't want me, so why not? Then I heard a slight cough and the rustling of sheets. "Krista?" I wet the bed again. A small voice cried out, and I immediately jumped out of the bed and rushed to my little sister. The click-clacking of the woman on the ceiling retreated into the closet as I pulled my younger sister into my arms. "Oh, Sammy, it's okay. We'll get you all cleaned up in no time. Don't cry," I said softly as she sobbed into my shoulder. I washed my sister and cleaned the wet spot on her bed, then laid down a towel to cover the wetness, since we didn't have any extra sheets. I could hear my mom and dad arguing in their bedroom, so I lay down on the mattress beside my sister and began to tell her a story, keeping my voice low to not disturb my other 3 sleeping siblings. Once there was a beautiful princess who was locked away in a very sad, lonely castle. She had so many responsibilities and felt so alone, but every day she continued on with her work because she knew that no one else would do it. One day, a strange woman arrived and offered to take away the princess's pain. The woman on the ceiling never showed herself to me after that night, but her predictions about my life came true. It was a long, extremely hard road growing up like that for all of us kids, especially when we realized our childhood wasn't normal. Adulthood was almost as rough. Learning things about society, normal behavior, cleaning your home, even basic hygiene was rough on all of us. My parents failed us, but she didn't. The woman on the ceiling didn't fail me. She wanted to help me. Sometimes I regret not taking her hand and joining her, whatever that might have meant. Sometimes I still feel a cold chill across my back and know that she's behind me or above me, but when I turn around, she's not there. Sometimes I wish she was. The clock on my computer reads 10 p.m., but it looks like the sun is just starting to set outside. I'm exhausted. It's freezing in here, and my coworkers are clearly sick or possessed or something. Reddit seems to be my only contact to the outside world, as my phone has no service and all the other websites are blocked off by our company's firewall. I'm trapped on the 4th floor, which is the top floor, and I'm typing this up trying to act normal so no one notices I'm not like them. Let me start from the beginning. Work started like normal. Came in, did some phone calls for clientele, chatted with my co-workers. Everything was fine, and at noon I went down for lunch. I normally don't eat lunch, but we had workers here earlier fixing the AC, so it's freezing on my floor, and a hot lunch sounded good. On my way back up, I zoned out and felt like I climbed an extra flight of stairs. Like I got to the top, realized I was really out of breath for something I do often, and felt odd. I shrugged it off and went back to my cubicle. The rest of my day is when everything got weird. My calls out all went to a generic voicemail. I got no return phone calls. Websites started getting blocked on the company's firewall. It is getting colder and colder in here, to the point where it's early September, but I'm wearing a hoodie and my fingers are starting to feel numb. Conversations with my coworkers were weird, like they weren't themselves, but trying to act like it. I asked the girl behind me if she thought it was cold, and her response was, "I'm not cold. I'm a warm-blooded person like you." I chalked the day up as just an odd day and went to leave at 4 p.m. The elevators weren't working, so I tried the stairs, but they're blocked off. The first stairwell had office equipment like desks and chairs blocking the door, so I couldn't open it. The second one had the push bar removed. I can't get the metal latch to unlock. I don't know if something is holding the other side, but it won't budge. The third stairwell I don't have the access code to because it's in the financial wing. Realizing I was stuck, I went to my friend who sits by the stairwell I normally use. She was eating a salad, but with her hands. Like there was a fork right next to the bowl, but she was just eating it like a slow raccoon. When I said hey, she looked at me with this dead look in her eyes, like she wasn't really there. She smiled and said I was silly. Just use the elevator. When I said it weren't working, she gave the response of, "You're funny. Just use the stairs then." She seemed to be unaware I couldn't use either and just kept referring to the other. When I said they were both blocked off, she smiled with this deadpan smile and went back to hand eating her salad. On my way back to my desk, to figure out what was going on, I realized that none of my coworkers were normal. One girl was on the phone talking about a shoe, a single shoe she got at the mall. But the mall she named I've never heard of. The guy next to her had a sandwich, but was just eating the condensed packets, including the packet and everything. Sitting at my desk, my coworker in front of me is typing in a notepad, but he just kept repeating "the price is cold" over and over. I can hear two people talking to each other over the cubicle wall, and they're talking about a vacation they took to the 2nd floor of their house to see the view. I've tried calling my family from my work phone, but I keep getting voicemail. My cell phone won't get service. The emergency hatches to the roof are in the stairwell, but I don't know if I want to go outside, because it's still just barely sunset, and it's 10 p.m. when it should be dark. Hell, I started typing this at 10:01 p.m. and it's only 10:02 p.m. It's like time is moving slower. At 6 I started getting emails from my coworkers. They seem like regular work type emails, but all of them are just off. Subject titles of a few are: Reminder, volleyball tournament on September 83. And blue pens gone in storage, red ones available, yum. I have a meeting notice from my boss entitled Group Communication with Breath and Lips, room 430, with a date set for sometime in the year 2024. People keep walking by my desk and I just smile and type like I'm working. No one has noticed that I'm not one of them. I went to the bathroom and there was a man standing in the women's room drinking from the faucet. The woman next to him didn't seem to mind. She was moving one earring from one ear to the other, then back, over and over. I was terrified in my stall when the woman in the next one to me started whispering to herself about how her shoes felt like crystal horses, over and over. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do, but I'm exhausted. I I feel like I've been awake for 30 hours. I haven't seen any cleaning crews, and I know there is a janitor's closet with a lock on it that no one goes into. It's big enough for me to sleep in, and the vent can be closed in there so it won't be as cold. There's also a snack room on our floor, which no one seems to want to go in now that they've all changed. I should have enough food to last a month. I sound crazy. I can't believe I'm just planning to live here. Why can't I leave? I've tried posting this multiple times with the address of my work or the GPS coordinates, but it won't let me post without my company firewall. It's like I can't let anyone know where I am to help save me. I see people walking on the streets down below and cars driving by, but I can't alert them without making a scene. Something tells me I should just try and get some sleep. Maybe it'll be better in the morning. Maybe I'm just dreaming. I've heard a lot of stories from my grandfather. He was a detective for 27 years of his life, and I grew up listening to the tales of him and his fellow lawmen. As a child, he obviously amended the stories quite a bit to make them age appropriate, but as I grew up, more and more of the true stories came out. Starting about 2 years ago, my grandpa got sick. He's been on a slow decline ever since, and while it's been one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with, his illness acted as a catalyst for a set of stories he'd never brought up before. He said he kept them filed away deep in a folder he doesn't like to open. He calls them the impossible ones. But this last one, the one he told me last night, he says it's the one that still keeps him up some nights. The one he thinks about every day. He said he's looked over the case files more than he can remember, done a full re-examination of it all more times than he can remember, and it never makes any more sense. He said he only told me now because he can feel it in his bones that he doesn't have a lot of time left. I recorded him telling me the story, so what follows is my transcription of the case, verbatim. I've only excluded his coughing fits and any off-topic remarks made during the telling of the case. The case was a murder-kidnapping, at least that's what it looked like, and it was me and Olson. I've told you about him. There was a family, the Nebels. There was Benjamin, the husband, Jennifer the wife, and Katie their 6-year-old daughter. One of their neighbors had gone out for the paper around 6 a.m. and saw the Nebels' front door wide open. When she went over to see if everything was okay, she saw the wife's body. The neighbor called 911 and eventually we were sent over there. Now, when I say there was no outward signs of a struggle, I mean it. There was no sign whatsoever that anything had happened. Well, except for the dead body. But even her body, there were no wounds, no marks of any kind. I'm getting ahead of myself. On our way to the house, it came over the radio that the husband and daughter were unaccounted for. If you're thinking, the husband did it, we did too, obviously. Problem was, both of the family's cars were still in the garage, so we think they might be on foot. Some officers canvassed the neighborhood, and no one had seen them, including their 2 neighbors that were on their porches for hours, starting in the early morning. No one had heard any kind of commotion coming from their house either. I mentioned the wife's body. She didn't have a hair out of place. She was on her back in the kitchen. About a third of her upper body was under the table. We found out after the autopsy that, well, she just died. There was no cause that they could find. She'd been a perfectly healthy woman. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, ate right, and exercised. It was like she just blinked her eyes and gone from life to death. Anyways, we searched the house. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb, basement to attic, found nothing. No evidence of a struggle, no weapon, nothing. So we left. We'd spent hours in that house. Thought maybe we should come back in a day or 2, with some fresh eyes. We went over to where Benjamin worked. He was a supervisor at a lumber yard. According to his co-workers, he'd shown up at work that morning just before 5 a.m. When he got in, He worked on this narrow crate thing he was building in his office. Something he told his co-workers was a project for his house. According to the other morning supervisor, he'd only built about half of the thing. Around 6:15, he said he was running to the bathroom, and that was the last time anyone saw him. They never saw him leave. While we were at the lumber yard, I realized I'd left my notes at the house. We drove back over there, and we got there while they were still taking the wife's body away. As soon as we walked in, the stench hit us like a bus. It was what a newly discovered but long dead body smells like. We knew it obviously couldn't have been the wife. We asked a few of the officers and forensic folks that they were still at the house what the smell was, and they told us that it had only started a few minutes before we'd gotten back there. I'm not exaggerating when I say the smell was everywhere in the house. I've smelled some dead ones before, but this smelled like every wall in the place was lined with corpses. Pretty quickly, we found that the smell was strongest leading up to the attic. Now, I told you before, we checked the attic. I checked it myself probably 5 times, but when we went back up, me and Olsen, I was up the little pole ladder first, and when I poked my head up, I saw something. I saw a piece of wood, like a box, a crate. It was shaped kind of like a rifle case, maybe 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide, maybe 6 inches deep, rectangular. It was standing straight up, and there was blood leaking from it. We called the photographers and all the people in there. They all did their thing, and finally they pull out the nails and open the box. Out falls the husband. Think about that. This guy was maybe 5'10", 140 pounds, and he was put in a 3 foot by 2 foot by 6 inch crate. His bones were just a mess. His insides and all his organs, they were flattened. They were just wet, squishy pieces of fabric almost. He was stuffed in there like, I don't know what like. He was just a rectangular of blood, skin and parts. His skin had the discoloration of a body that had been dead for about 2 weeks, which obviously didn't make sense since they'd seen him at work that morning. He was also missing his eyeballs. We were standing there trying to rationalize the whole situation when something caught everyone's ears at the same time. A little girl's voice calling out for help. What followed was a sequence of all the people in the attic, and the rest of the house, and the people on the lawn, and a few people that were standing on the other side of the yellow tape, all saying something of the variation of the phrase. It sounded like it was coming from there. Problem was, every single person swore they had heard it coming from a different direction. Me? I heard it from right above me. No kidding. The first time I heard the little girl's voice say, "Help me," I looked straight up, right up to the rafters. Of course, she wasn't there. It was just my brain's response to where it received her voice as coming from. We had to listen to every one of these people tell us where they thought they heard her voice coming from. People swore up and down they heard it coming from the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom closets, the refrigerator, the tank behind the toilet, for God's sake. People on the streets said they heard it from underneath their cars, behind trees, on the sides of the houses, next to the nibbles. Everyone heard her voice for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, and then it just stopped. About 2 weeks after that, the wife's sister had a funeral for Jennifer. It went fine. They buried her, all that. The husband's remains were cremated not long after that and put on display in a different part of the cemetery. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but at some point over the few weeks after he was cremated, someone stole his urn. It was missing for about 6 months, and then one day we get a call. Find out a groundskeeper at the cemetery had called in. The wife had been dug up and posed like she was leaning against the grave, just relaxing. She had the urn in her hands, but it was wrapped in skin. Well, they tested it, and it was the husband's skin. They'd pretty well reconstructed the man after he poured out the crate, and he hadn't been missing any skin. And remember, I told you his skin was discolored? Well, this skin was perfectly preserved. And inside the urn, with his ashes, there were 3 eyeballs. Only one of them was the husband's. It's been, 22 years? I still hear that girl's voice calling out sometimes, and I don't mean my memory or mine is playing tricks on me. Ask your grandmother, she heard her, the same 6-year-old's voice. And then I remembered, it was May 12th, 2007. I was going to pick up a pizza for us. I saw that girl. I saw Katie Nebel. I don't mean I saw her grown up. I don't mean I saw a little girl that looked like her when she was young. I mean, I saw that kid. She was standing outside the Walgreens right by our old house crying. I pulled over and got out of the car, and I started to walk up to her. I can't explain how I felt in that moment. I was nauseous. I was so afraid, terrified, more than I've ever been. She looked right at me and said in the same voice, "Help me, please." I don't know what the hell happened, but she just disappeared. I never took my eyes off of her. She was just there 1 second, gone the next. I thought I was losing my mind. I was seriously worried about my mental health. But then, about an hour after I got back home, the phone rang. It was Olsen. Hadn't talked to him in about 5 years, and he called me that night. Said he saw Katie Nebel sitting on a bus stop bench, crying. He lived on the other side of the country. He killed himself the next day. There's never a good ending to these stories, I know. If there was, they wouldn't be the impossible ones. I'd have them figured out one way or another. And I know I've told you some others, but that girl's voice still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I hear it from downstairs. Sometimes from the bathroom. Sometimes I'll be laying on my side, facing away from your grandmother, and it'll sound like it's coming from her mouth. We never found a trace of that girl, nothing. I told you what they do with those cases. The goddammit. I'm sorry. That's it. That's the worst one. Some of the other ones might sound worse to you, but that's the worst for me, okay? He told me he didn't want to talk about it anymore, and said now that he told me, he'd never talk about it again. I've had a copy of this correspondence for a while now, and just thought I'd share. One of my mementos from back in my court clerk days. I've been showing it to people for years, pulling it out whenever I wanted to get a reaction. Most people laugh. Honestly, it always kind of creeped me out. By the way, no, I never did meet the person who wrote it. I just handed it as evidence after it was read out loud for the judge. I shouldn't say which court I worked for, because putting this out there for everyone to see is kind of, illegal. You guys can keep a secret, right? Well, either way, here it is. To the Honorable and Righteous Judge Hawthorne, in whom I entrust my fate, I have prepared this written correspondence under the instruction of my attorney, to be read by an intermediary of my choosing, as allowed to me by the law in recognition of my unavoidable absence on the date of my hearing. I would like to first address the matter of the attempted assassinations of my character that your court has been regretfully subjected to. Much has been made of my personal declarations of my own extraterrestrial origin. I will not argue against these, except to say that this trial is meant to establish the legality of my having been declared dead, not the conditions of my birth or my arrival to this country. Those have been documented elsewhere, and whether I agree with them or not is a matter for a different day in perhaps a different court. It is true that I have undergone a medical analysis as per my agreement to be temporarily labor for Constar Regional. It is true that my eyes are positioned abnormally far apart on my skull, and that I suffer from strabismus, I do have an extra layer of organ tissues, compared to the standard anatomy, which I have not allowed to be tested. I did fail my examination, required to determine insurance liability, and was only hired on to a different position at the same company which paid less per year. This is not illegal, and my disabilities are my own concern. It is true that I have sometimes sold stories about myself and my interested journalists. I have specialties in certain areas that are specific and valuable. The claims that these are exaggerations cannot be proven and should be dismissed. I do not agree with the opinion of the alleged and misinformed physicist who claimed to be a character witness. Respectfully, what he knows about the uninterrupted transfer of matter between multiple unconnected physical points is laughable at best and dangerously ignorant at worst. As to my disposition, my assault charge has been dropped and my harassment charge is a civil case. I understand that I have been witnessed eating discarded cigarettes off of the pavement, but this is nothing more than a quirk of my personality. I have self-diagnosed with an eating disorder called pica. I do not need a doctor to let me know my own behavior. To know yourself is a virtue among most people on our shared earth, or so I have always understood. I do not abduct animals. The area that I am currently residing in has many large and predatory mammals, coyotes, bears. I have even known deer to eat meat when they are starving. I have witnessed this at night while walking in the woods. Others have witnessed it as well. They would not defend me in court, even upon request. They prefer to remain anonymous, and I respect their decision. Yes, I do believe in curses and have, perhaps, spoken about them loudly and in public on too many occasions. I had been married to a woman whose testimony from many years ago is regrettably available to the court, whose skull was protruded by a 5-inch nail when she was under the age of 14 and who began having visions afterwards. She has altered my future many times with her witchcraft. She is not a reliable witness. She has threatened me before with her magic. I once saw her drown a rabbit in a pool, but no one else is willing to say this about her. She did not have to admit this to the court, or even to appear before the court at all, although I am still subject to her accusations. I know which animals are allowed to be killed and when. I have been living in a society for my whole life and have assimilated well. One of the other able-bodied citizens whom I walk with once told me that they suspect my former wife is a hermaphrodite. Those whom I walk with can see these things, and I believe that they can see these things. That is also not a crime. I have been shown the photographs submitted to the court last week, in which I appear to be about the same age as I am now, and have a different skin tone. I have agreed through my attorney in my last declaration to the court that these are photographs of myself from 20 years ago. Yes, I maintain that I am 63 years old. Although I appear closer to a man in his 40s, yes, I am much paler now than I was. Yes, my eyes appear rounder and farther apart. But as I have already explained, and as I will remind you, the discrepancies end there. My ears are approximately the same height and width as previously recorded. My hairline recedes at the same point. My eyes are even the same color, with any change being accounted for reasonably by the lighting conditions in the photographs. My jaw and chin are close to the same dimensions, although I have gained weight. Yes, I am 3 inches shorter than declared on my previous ID. But when I was younger, I was known to lie about my height, because I was nervous about mating selection. I remind the court again that none of these are crimes, and certainly none of them are mistakes worthy of a man being wholesale discarded by society. My attempt last year to claim the identification of a different deceased man was also a mistake. The names are very similar, and are only off by 4 letters. I have forgotten the exact spelling that I had previously used, because I have been in another country for so long, and had been working under a different legal name at the time. There are no records of my time there, because of a tragic incident involving a large wildfire. I cannot control the elements, and that should be obvious. I have no authority over how these bureaucracies operate. Certainly not where or how they store their documents. It would require a conspiracy of considerable scale to change a detail like that, and I am only one man, operating solely for my own interests. I am now seeking to return to legal status, in the country of my birth, under good conditions and with legal employment. I am in the process of starting my own business, which will provide sanitation services to corporate government facilities, including the handling of sensitive documents for disposal. It is a competitive industry and will require some level of security clearance, but I have made many allies in this country who are willing to assist me in my ambitions. Much has also been said about the dangerous company that I have kept, but I have already denied those claims, and as in everything else during this trial, I have been completely honest. The court can trust that I am a man of peace, as it is necessary. Although at the age of 63, I am now too old and harmless to be a member of standing army. I am willing to join any militia which the court feels would best suit me in order to defend this country from any outside threats. Having lived here for most of my life, other than my decades abroad, I am still aware of our traditions and our anthem, and am currently endeavoring to uphold and respect these as best as I can. I have already severed ties with the nationalist group which I was only persuaded to join under false pretenses. Of my neighbors who have forced their way into this process, demanding the undue privilege of speaking their falsehoods against me, one is a communist and another is an atheist. I am willing to provide their names if it will assist the court. I understand that I have not always acted as scrupulously as I could have, but in the past 5 years I have lived among you. I have gained support here and my network is growing. I did not expect this trial to be such an assault on my dignity, but I am willing to defend myself if it means claiming my identity and furthering my goals. I was under the belief that you had already been given all the evidence you would need to allow this, but instead the process has dragged out for weeks. I have already made the decision that I will not rest until I am made whole once again under the law. Perhaps then, in consideration of these details, the court will find it in good conscience to grant me the peace that I deserve. The aimless wandering that my neighbors have complained of, sometimes standing idly in front of their homes late at night, has been in response to the stresses of this trial. I am a light sleeper and deep thinker when I am weighed down by such burdensome anxieties. Please relieve the startled man of his troubles and allow him to once again the rights which you have previously afforded him. I trust that you will do the right thing, as benefiting the wisdom of your station. Signed, John Doe. Well, the warning was there. You've started now, so you have to finish. It's going to draw you in, just like it did to me. Have you ever heard of Baron Connor? He was a writer, not hugely successful. He only published a few short novellas and the occasional short story here and there. The stuff is hard to find. Nowadays, you have to look into the darkest corners of the seediest used bookstores. I'm a sucker for old horror fiction, and that was his bread and butter. So I spent weeks searching for some of his paperbacks. I finally found the holy grail I had been looking for. It was an old first edition copy of his novella, Cursed Fates and Wandering Wills. It was his last published work before he killed himself in 1991. Supposedly, there were only about 100 copies printed, and of that most of them were bought by Connor himself. Supposedly, he burned all of his copies he could get a hold of one night, then jumped on the fire himself. By all accounts, he was a disturbed man, and apparently his publisher only printed this one, because they would breach contact if they didn't. They said it was the ravings of a madman, going on about a curse transmitted to him, and how he would be haunted until he passed on. Supposedly, that's why he wrote the book. That's what the book is about. He goes into detail about wandering into a cheap theater for a grindhouse showing when he was 19 years old. Apparently the film was some low-budget horror, as was usual for those. He describes being one of 4 people in the theater at the time, the others being a young gay couple and an older woman in her mid-60s. The movie was something about a lynch fever dream. It followed a man who stepped out into a surrealist world one day where everyone was replaced by what could best be described by revenants, spirits tethered to this world by some sort of grudge. The film was a non-stop chase as the man ran away from the revenants, finally finding a camera, filming what he saw, and putting it onto film to be shown in a theater. Connor walked out of that showing changed. He said that everywhere he went, he saw these revenants, all chasing after him, no matter how far he ran to get away. His editor and agent commented after his death about how he had been frantic and paranoid, telling them that he needed to leave as soon as possible to get away from the ghosts chasing after him, begging to feast on his mind. The book went on with Connor describing everything about the revenants he saw, how they chased him from home to work to anywhere he went. He spoke of being unable to sleep, how the only way he could get any rest was by getting on a bus or a plane. But even then, how? Well, you can't get rest there. He was an insomniac by the end, not trusting anyone and looking like a ghost himself. By the end, he had dropped down to a little under 100 pounds, only leaving his house for food or water. His agent, who discovered his dead body, went in to check on him after 6 days of no contact. A bender wasn't anything new for Connor, who had been an oddball and an alcoholic since he was 16. The poor guy had been an orphan since he was 10, and in and out of foster homes since then, so alcohol and drugs were nothing out of the ordinary. The agent found his charred remains on top of the pile of burned books. He wasn't a huge author, so the news didn't really run with it like they did with other celebrity deaths. There was a small obituary in the local paper, and an unmarked grave somewhere in the Atlanta outskirts. All the proof he was ever alive, other than a few remaining copies of his books. Near the end of the book was a note from the author, an apology, speaking about how he was sorry for writing this, sorry for letting it being published. He knew that it would be carried on to whoever read it, that if he passed it on, the revenants would leave him to hound someone else. He didn't want to burden someone else with his fate, but he simply couldn't live running from the ghosts anymore. I could see why the novella was a thing of cult classic status. It was deeply personal, giving everyone a look at what Connor was facing and the illness he was dealing with. Obviously, he was struggling with schizophrenia or something of that, paranoid delusions, definitely manic depression. He was a troubled man, gone before he was able to truly achieve greatness. I had finished reading the book in one sitting one morning while I sat in a cafe drinking my morning coffee. I closed the book, standing up and stretching, ready to go about my day. I looked out the window towards the busy intersection and almost fell back in shock. Something was floating outside of the window. It looked like it was a person at one time, but was now frail and decayed. Its bones showed through the emaciated skin, rotting flesh hanging off. It looked at me with dark, hollow eyes, empty of anything except hunger. It floated towards the glass, clothes in tatters around its legs. I could see a splintered bone sticking out from under the material where the legs should have been. It reached the window and scratched at the glass, a low moan moving over its lips. It was trying to come towards me. I looked around to see if anyone else could see this thing, if it was visible to the other patrons. None of them batted an eye. I ran out of there as fast as I could, running to my car and screeching out of the parking lot. It couldn't be real. These were the same things Connor had written about, the same things that drove him into his fiery death. Dear God, how could this actually happen? I kept driving until I got home. I ran inside, looking behind me to see multiple revenants floating around the neighborhood. I don't know what they wanted, or why they were suddenly there. I locked my door and hoped to God that it would keep them out. It's been 2 weeks since I read the book. I had meals and groceries delivered to my house, but I've lost my job because I've been too scared to go outside. I can't handle this. I can't live with these things constantly following me. Even now I feel them gnawing at my mind. They're ripping apart my sanity, tearing the very fabric of my existence. If you're reading this still, I'm so sorry. I don't want to do this, but it worked for Connor, so maybe it'll work for me. I don't know how I'll live with myself after knowing I've damned some poor soul to living out the same faith, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Again, I'm so sorry. I hope you can figure out how to end this.